Welcome to another episode of Believe in Big Ten on the heels of a chaotic and often violent rivalry weekend in college football. We have a full breakdown of everything that happened this past weekend, the Big Ten, as we look ahead to the Big Ten championship game, which somehow is Penn State versus Oregon amidst chaos in Columbus.
Literally.
The Buckeyes go down to the Michigan Wolverines in perhaps the greatest upset in the history of the game. We are going to get to all of that here on Believe in Big Ten. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with constant real-time odds and action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, and even UFC. Head to betonline.ag today, and don't forget to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Believe in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. He is Rhett Lewis from the Big Ten and NFL Network. I'm Tom Hannafin. Check out State of State, a Penn State football show with myself and former Penn State and NFL defensive back on the Believe Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. So as you can imagine, I'm pretty stoked about Penn State somehow being the Big Ten title game. And the only reason it really happened, I mean, yes, Penn State took care of Maryland handily this weekend. I think a lot of people expected that. I don't think that many people were expecting Michigan to somehow upend the Ohio State Buckeyes in the shoe. What was your perspective on this game?
Well, my perspective was that it followed almost exactly the formula of the previous three Michigan victories in this rivalry. And when it comes down to it, whoever the most physical team is, whoever runs the ball more efficiently and more productively and stops the run more dominantly wins the game. And that's what happened here once again. If you go back and you look at the 4 wins for Michigan, now going back to 21, 297 rushing yards, 252 rushing yards, 156 and 172 in this most recent affair, averaging just over 219 yards rushing per game against the Buckeyes in these last 4. They went 7 for 14 on third down attempts in this game. I mean, Davis Warren was a non-factor at quarterback. He threw 2 picks, in fact, right? And was just 62 passing yards. But this was about being the physically tougher and more dominant team up front. Ohio State was not that team in this game. So in the fourth quarter, it was a bloodletting. I mean, it was like 13 minutes of the 15 minutes of the fourth quarter. The ball was in Michigan's hands. Ohio State couldn't get off the field. What happened to the defense we saw, the week before against Indiana? It just wasn't there for Ohio State. They just did not have that kind of resolve. They were outgained. The Buckeyes were 101-10 in the final 4-5 and in the final 15 minutes. And Michigan went 4 of 5 on third downs. They could not get off the field. It was incredible. The other thing, and we can kind of get back to that, but that was my big takeaway, is that Michigan once again were the bullies on the block in this rivalry.
I'm so glad you brought up the fourth quarter only stats, because it's just mind-boggling. Like, Michigan,
get off the field.
4 or 5 on third down, as you mentioned. Penalties were an issue for Ohio State through this game. If you told me that the team that actually was successful throwing the ball in the fourth quarter was Michigan, I would have thought you were crazy. 2 out of 3, at least in the fourth quarter. But having the interception there, I think the thing that's puzzling to me is Ohio State came into this game with a banged up offensive line. Like, you're playing a lot of reserves. And granted, I saw the way Ohio State worked into their depth chart along their offensive line and had success against Penn State. So I was kind of expecting, like, all right, they should be okay with this. And then you have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka. Will Howard is no slouch at quarterback. It just felt
Didn't
like
play his best game.
I agree with that. It just felt like the identity of the Ohio State offense was thrown away for this game and this game only, and I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a good point. We did not see it from the Ohio State passing game when they have the most elite, trio of wide receivers in the country. And I think that is, part of the head scratcher of this whole game. I think you get locked up. I tell you what, man, look, I know the Indiana Purdue rivalry is one that to us resonates the way that Ohio State and Michigan resonate with the game.
Sure.
And we talk about, hey, what have you done to beat Purdue today? Like it's a 365 kind of mindset. But man, it just feels like there's so much emphasis on that game, and I do understand that part of it. But they just get caught up in it in a way in which, hey, we've got to be more physically imposing. We have to be the ones that are running the football against them. We got to show them that we're the match our intensity, and that's all fine and good. But like, find the best path to victory, right? Find the best path to victory, and that's where we just didn't see it. Will Howard did throw the ball 33 times. Like, it's not like, I think you got to give credit to Michigan too, defensively for, for having a terrific plan. Wink Martindale has taken a lot of credit as the first year defensive coordinator for Sharon Moore. And I think, he's really come on in these last couple of weeks and done a nice job for them, but they do it without Will Johnson. Yes. And they did it without Colston Loveland, best player on offense and arguably best player on defense. Like, that's, man, that makes it sting even more. And credit to Michigan. They found a way to get it done. But one of the situational things that I thought was really weird, we kind of went back to the play calling a little bit in this one. 3rd and 10, right before one of the missed field goals. Run again with the most elite skill position players in the country, and we're not letting them try to touch the ball. 3rd and 10, we're just playing for a field goal, which we missed. Man, the red zone stuff was bad, right? The 2 field goals, the interception from Will Howard. I mean, it kept piling on.
Now the reaction is very strong from Buckeye fans of Ryan Day is public enemy number 1. And I was astonished at how he looked after the game, and that, yes, I expected him to look stunned and shocked and all those things, but then especially the post-game brawling that was going on, Michigan trying to plant the flag at the 50 inside the O, players being maced. I mean, it was nasty there after the game. And he stood there and did nothing. And there's something to be said about leadership in any walk of life that you experience. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. And those people that stand on the sidelines and don't know how to act or don't act aren't leaders. And he didn't look like a leader in that situation. He didn't look like somebody that had the team behind him or was listening to him. And a lot of the stuff, there was a post by former Ohio State Buckeye Tyreek Johnson talk about the national championship game recently against Alabama and how Ryan Day didn't speak to the team at halftime. Instead, he blamed his other coaches. I can understand how, looking at this game, you would look at offensive coordinator Chip Kelly and be like, what the hell was that? So I don't think Chip Kelly should be completely ignored in this evaluation. But it does beg the question, does Ohio State fire Ryan Day now? Do you do it after the season? And here's the irony. There's still a chance Ohio State could win the national championship.
Yeah, they're talented enough to win the national championship, but I don't think this game was handled very well. I don't think it was managed very well. And for the first time, like, I've been on the Ryan Day, on the Ryan Day support track for a long time. Like, this guy wins and he keeps winning. And now I get it. The 3 games at the end of this regular season, the last 3 years, now 4, makes it very difficult to stomach, and it makes you kind of get blinded if you're a Buckeye fan by all the rage of those 4 losses, and you don't see the fact that he's gone a 99% win percentage in all the other games in regular seasons. But the other thing is, there's a shell-shocked nature to that, to what I was watching. And again, I think that comes along with just kind of placing so much on this game. Like, coaches talk about, hey, every game counts the same, right? Every game is the same. Every game, we approach every game the same. It's clear they don't with this game. And I think we appreciate the passion of a rivalry. And to a certain extent, I get it. But to me, it feels like you have put too much on this game, and everyone is tight. Everyone is puckered up. Everyone is just, playing not to lose rather than going out there to win. And that's when you get just a completely shell-shocked environment from Ryan Day afterwards, watching Jack Sawyer, one of his best players,
Yeah.
go nuts. Like, I just think there's got to be a better way to approach this game if I am Ohio State. Now, here's the other thing on Ryan Day. To answer your question on being
Mhm.
fired, I don't think so. Who's out there that's better?
Chip Kelly's in the system.
No, it's no, not a chance to me. But
Why?
and if, I
Why do you think that?
one, he left a head coaching job to go to Ohio State. I get it. UCLA was a little bit less than
Yeah.
in terms of talent pool, and he had an opportunity to go still make a lot of money and be an offensive coordinator and coach ball. I don't think he wants that on his shoulders. But there's not an obvious replacement to me. And so I think we all have to be cognizant the grass ain't always greener on the other side. And I know that's hard to understand when you're sitting here in the face of losing 4 straight against Michigan. But that's the fact. And until you see an obvious, like, that guy's better, we can get him, we're going to go get him. I don't know how you can fire Ryan Day.
The irony in that statement is that's exactly how Penn State fans have felt about James Franklin for quite some time. And
Exactly.
as of last week, it was 3 consecutive 10-win seasons. Now Penn State sits at 11-1 after beating Maryland 44-7. Oregon took care of business handily against Washington in Eugene. So that sets up the Big Ten championship game that is going to be this Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS in Indianapolis. So not to ignore the biggest game, the only game in the Big Ten coming up this weekend, but the game obviously drew a lot of headlines. We're going to get to our biggest
Yeah.
quarterback, playmaker, and defensive performance here in a minute, but I do want to sit with this here for a second. Oregon, you and I have talked about this for quite a bit as this season has gone on. I think plenty of people expected them to be in this situation. As someone who has followed Penn State football now this entire season and for my entire life, I am surprised to see Penn State in this position. But again, 11-1 for the first time since 2008. You're possibly in line to win a Big Ten championship for the first time since 2016, the
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley years. I mean, it just feels like this is rolling in Penn State's favor, but still, this should be a really even matchup. What do you see?
I worry about Penn State up front on the offensive side of the ball.
Agreed.
Oregon is coming off a game in which they had a program record 10 sacks against Washington, dominated the Huskies for Dan Lanning's first win in that rivalry game. They get after you up front on defense in a way that it comes in waves, it comes in rotations, and they don't lose intensity and production when those waves are cycling through. Birch, Harmon, Tuioti, Uyunglele, like Betcher, Bassa, like it just keeps Devin Jackson, it keeps going. And that I worry about. I worry about that a little bit. Now, I do think that they can still find success with Tyler Warren, as they have, with him every year every week against every opponent. But I worry about the ability to run the football, and I worry about Drew Aller's ability to navigate pressure. That's my before, like, in full disclosure, have not watched enough of each of those games, like, all the way through to truly get after it. And I got to go back and find some more Drew Aller under pressure looks and see how Penn State can try to figure this thing out. But right now, that's my first thought.
Yeah, having watched every snap Drew Aller has ever played, he has certainly progressed since last season in
Yeah.
terms of handling pressure. I think we remember the Ohio State and Michigan games last year where he was a deer in headlights. His completion percentage dropped to about 50% or worse. He has certainly improved in that. He's changed his body. He's able to be a little bit more nimble there. The problem is still for Penn State. It's Tyler Warren against the world and the passing game, and the running game just hasn't been what it was in the first 5 weeks of the season. And you look at the competition Penn State faced, there's your explanation as to why. Offensive line has been good. Losing right tackle Anthony Donko, a problem. For me, if I'm Oregon, I do exactly what Ohio State did to Penn State a number of weeks ago in Happy Valley, and you double Tyler Warren. You can play man comfortably, and you can get after the quarterback with 4 or 5. You really don't have to do all that much, in my opinion, because Oregon's got an outstanding front seven. They can get after the passer. It's going to feel a lot like, I think, the Ohio State-Penn State game, in that I think it's going to be low scoring. I believe Penn State is plus 3.5 in this game in terms of the spread, according to our friends at Bet Online. And it's going to be a question of, can Penn State score points? Because defensively, Penn State's been outstanding. You used the point of how Oregon did against Washington. Penn State also playing Washington this year. That game was
Yeah.
at Penn State, but still. 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and interception. They made Will Rogers' life hell. So this is an outstanding defense that Penn State puts on the field. It's a matter of the same problems Penn State ran into against Ohio State. If you can take away the explosive play, or at least limit the explosive plays, you've got a chance. Not sure how that's going to look against Dylan Gabriel and a fleet of wide receivers and running backs and a really good offensive line. That's the breaking point for me.
Yeah, I think that that'll be kind of interesting for sure in this one. And I just I got to see it. I got to see them hold up. That to me is, I got to see them hold up on the offensive side. I do, like you, have faith in what Penn State can do defensively. I think Tom Allen has done a remarkable job there in year one as defensive coordinator, and they really haven't missed a beat from where they were a year ago with Manny Diaz. So I like that, and I think that'll be the matchup. And let's see how they can deal with some of the explosive ability that Oregon has, down the field, and in the run game. And I think that'll be something to watch, certainly, as we get closer to kickoff on Saturday.
Who do you trust more in a late game, 1 possession ball game? Dan Lanning or James Franklin?
Dan Lanning.
Me too.
Dan Lanning. Now, would I have tried the fake field goal down there against Wisconsin in that situation? Probably not. But I appreciate that he did and had the wherewithal to do it. But yeah, that didn't do it for me. And the other thing is, like, Tez Johnson's back, so that throws a wrench into Penn State's plans a little bit. And so let's see what all that looks like there as well, because he had just 3 catches in this game. One of them went for a score against Washington. But man, as he starts to work his way back into rhythm, like, watch out, because he's been out for a while and itching to make an impact again.
Mm-hmm. Penn State has a good amount of injuries. So there was part of me that was looking at this and I was like, man, it'd be nice if they didn't make the Big Ten title game so they could rest up and get ready for, what would it be, December 21st, that Saturday. Now it changes things. And again, I never would have expected this as someone who's followed Penn State football this entire year. There is a real world possibility that Penn State earns a first round bye. I would not have guessed that back in August, September, October of this year.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, it's, I wouldn't call it a long shot. I'd say the odds are not, my odds are not with Penn State at this point.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yep. But anything can happen, man. I mean, like, they're talented enough to win. Now it's about, can you go put it all together?
Let's get to our biggest performers of the weekend, looking at the biggest quarterback performance to start things off.
Should we say it together in unison?
Curtis
Rourke.
Yes.
That wasn't quite in unison, but you get the point. Yeah.
You go ahead for your album.
I mean, like, look, this was the piece de resistance of the Curt Cignetti regular season era, because the postseason era is upon us, folks. And if you for a second believe that Indiana is not going to be in a 12-team playoff at 11-1 in the Big Ten, you could just flip this thing off right now and go live under a rock somewhere, because it's happening. Okay. Sorry, I did that. That was a little aggressive.
You guys exercised a lot of demons against Purdue.
Oh,
I love how Cignetti was like, I thought the offense could have done more. You won 66-0. And listen, Purdue is literally one of the worst teams in FBS. So take it.
And as such, unfortunately, Ryan Walters, lost his job as the head coach after that game. Yeah. Look, I think 2 years is too quick, but when things went off the rails the way that they did this year for him, it's hard to point a finger to progress. And like, where do you see us getting back on track? It's hard to point to that after a 66-0 loss to your bitter in-state rival. I really like Ryan Walters as a coach. I like him as a guy. He played for my father-in-law in high school. He is a terrific dude, and I think a really smart coach. And my guess is he's going to go be a defensive coordinator somewhere and work his way back up to a top job, and will probably have some pretty good lessons in his back pocket to take with him from these 2 years at Purdue. But for Curtis Rourke in Indiana, this is everything that this offense has shown us all year long. And it did it all in the landscape of 60 minutes. 349 passing yards. He was absolutely money. They had the RPOs going. They had the explosives going. They had the creative plays going and all in the snow. It was a snow globe game in Bloomington. And he still went for 6 tutties through the air. And by the way, they still had 2 touchdowns on the ground as well. It was just an absolute slobber knocker. And it was just phenomenal. The crazy thing about it is he missed on 3 of his first 6 passes. And then only missed on like 7 more the rest of the game. Like it was just 23 of 31. He was poised. He was accurate. There's nothing you couldn't like about what Curtis Rourke did in this game. And he got all of his receivers involved. Elijah Surratt, Miles Price, Miles Cross, Keyshawn Williams, again, was an absolute dude with the ball in his hands. Omar Cooper caught a couple of big ones. Like it's just, and then I love the catch that Zach Horton made in the end zone,
Yes.
the tight end. It was a great way to send the Hoosier seniors out. So many of which came like Curtis Rourke did through the portal or from James Madison with Kurt Signetti. And maybe, just maybe, and if you ask me, it's not a maybe, but they'll get one more shot there at the Rock in Bloomington in the college football playoff. We shall see.
We're going to find out. 586 total yards of offense.
Is that all?
That's it. Yeah. Rough performance for the offense. So we are agreed in our biggest QB performance of the weekend. Biggest playmaker of the weekend. I'm going to give it to Michigan defensive lineman Mason Graham. 7 total tackles. Second only to Ernest Hausman's 8. Didn't record a sack, but timely plays, making the plays that Michigan needed when they needed it. That was the strength of that defense. The interior of that defensive line just made life hell for Ohio State. We so rarely pay attention to linemen on the offensive or defensive side of the ball unless they're a defensive end that's getting a ton of sacks per game. I could have looked at Abdul Carter, what he did against Maryland, but again, you put the competition into perspective. Playmaker of the weekend for me, it was Mason Graham.
Boy, for me, Aiden Lawfrey was incredible for the Illinois Fighting Illini in this game. Rushed for a career high 173 yards on just 12 carries and had a hat trick of touchdowns. It was an incredible day on the ground. Each of his scores went for at least 30 yards. Like that's how explosive it was on the ground. Northwestern in the, what do they call this thing? The Lincoln Battle for the Land of Lincoln.
Like the Lincoln Memorial Cup or something. I forget.
Yeah. That's where we're at. But that was a big one for rivalry's sake. And I thought it's a sophomore now. That's a building block for the future too, that Brett Bielema is seeing there make a big time impact in the regular season finale.
The Land of Lincoln Trophy.
That's right. Land of Lincoln. I forget exactly how it is termed. Yes.
Yeah. What did you think of, by the way, Brett Bielema's case on social media for why Illinois should be in the playoff? Granted, he did it at the expense of Lane Kiffin's tweet about why Ole Miss should be in the playoff.
Right. 3 losses. I just don't think I have a whole lot of sympathy for teams with 3 losses. Now, I know that Illinois' losses were to good teams, right, as he made mention of in his post there. But the thing that I keep coming back to when it comes to resumes is not necessarily strength of schedule and wins over quality opponents, but it's losses to inferior opponents. That's where the SEC has nothing to stand on. Mm-hmm. That's where Ole Miss has nothing to stand on. Georgia has nothing to stand on. That's where Alabama has nothing to stand on. And that's where the Big Ten stands alone. With the exception of Ohio State losing to Michigan, that is the only bad loss. And again, it's a rivalry game and a team that's beat them for 3 straight years going into it. That is the only bad loss from any of the 4 teams that should and will be in the college football playoff in the Big Ten. Like crickets, if you're the SEC or the ACC or Miami or whoever else who's like, we belong. Why didn't you beat this team? Right? Okay, great. You managed to show up, in a big situation against a good team. Why can't you beat this team? Why did that happen more than once in many occasions? So that's kind of what I keep coming back to on that front.
And I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to be ticked off to see if Alabama somehow sneaks in.
Oh,
And
they laid the groundwork for it last week. Let's put them at 13.
yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that I have an issue with this entire college football playoff system as it is now with the 12-team playoff. In terms of, I disagree with a Boise State potentially getting a first round bye. Like, you're not one of the four best teams in the country. Like, we can look at this on paper and, like, yes, your resume is good. You beat the teams you're supposed to beat. You came up short against Oregon. There's nothing against that. But, like, you're telling me Boise State has a chance against Oregon,
I'll,
Texas,
I'll push
Georgia,
back on you on
Penn
that. That
State
that was a field goal game at the end of regulation for Boise State
in
to
in September, and
fall
not
to
to say that,
Oregon.
oh, it was
Yes,
a long time ago, but teams evolve. You know
that
this.
is true. That is 100% true. But they arguably have the best player in college football, who has consistently shown up week in, week out, and proven that. And so I am okay with where Boise State is at. But if they don't beat UNLV, I think they're out.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think they're going to find themselves in at-large bid at this point with all the SEC momentum with the 3 lost teams.
Let's wrap up our awards. Biggest
Yeah.
defensive performance of the weekend. I think if it's easy for me.
Michigan.
It's Michigan. Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest upset in the history of the game. Picked off Will Howard twice, held Ohio State to 3 yards per carry and 77 yards rushing. They held Tate, Smith, and Egbuka to 144 total receiving yards on just 15 catches. So it's like an average of like 48 per guy. 4 TFLs, held Ohio State to 6 of 16 on third down, and gave the Michigan offense, which was anemic outside of running the football with Mullings. Michigan had a 7-minute advantage in time of possession, as you mentioned earlier on in the show. In the fourth quarter, they had roughly a 13.5 to a 1.5 minute advantage in time of possession against Ohio State. Just ridiculous.
Yeah. The front four for Michigan completely dominated the game, and that's where it was won. They held Ohio State to 77 rushing yards on 26 carries. And in this game, that's what wins. Run production on both sides of the ball is what wins. Longest run for the Buckeyes in this game was 17 yards. During the 4-game win streak now, they've held the Buckeyes to 64, 143, 107, and 77, and have not allowed a rushing touchdown in 2 of the last 3 matchups. Big reason why they held Ohio State to just 10 points, fewest in this rivalry game since 1996. A lot of work to do for the Buckeyes to wash this, get rid of it, flush it, and try to make some sort of something out of the rest of this season, which will be in a college football playoff berth. But that, my friend, is for our episode on Wednesday.
The biggest thing I've learned this season with the parity that we now see, the 12-team playoff, the effect of NIL, the effect of the transfer portal, I was one of the first people to get really ticked off about the way Penn State played at Minnesota, came away with the win. It's kind of turned into this situation where anybody can get anybody, and that's in every conference. There are no more juggernauts. No one is really capable of being truly perfect. Now, I understand, yes, Oregon 12-0 in the regular season. So on paper, yes, they are perfect. But when you look at the construction of that team, there are still gaps that you can attack and you can get a victory against them. Hell, Ohio State nearly did it. Then Ohio State gets beat by Michigan, which was playing 500 ball, basically. Like, it's not a good Michigan team. It's really incredible to me the way that the game has changed. And I think it does require us to change our perspective in terms of how we evaluate these teams for the playoff. And I continue to ask the question, is the committee making these decisions based on merit and resume, strength of schedule, what the eye test, all those things, or are they doing it based on television ratings and revenue? Either are fine. Just make up your mind and be transparent about which one it is.
Fair enough. Plant your flag in it, right, Tom?
Yeah. Or your
Plant
pitchfork.
your flag, right, and then be prepared for
like
chaos.
12 fights this weekend, a lot of flag planting. Baker Mayfield's like, yeah, I started this thing. You're welcome, I guess.
What
But
do we
like,
do? Where did this come from? Like, it was everyone
it's a lot of
watching.
vitriol in America.
I mean, I get that, and I get the rivalry part of it, but I mean, I guess the one thing it tells you is that a lot of road teams won in rivalry games, right? Otherwise, you're not planting a flag. So that was that was an interesting piece. I think it's obviously something that's got to get cleaned up. It was a bad look in a lot of places.
Yeah.
and there's a right way to be passionate about your hatred for your rival, and then there's also a right way to find some respect in the end of it. And I think that's kind of where we need to focus our energies in next year's rivalry weekend.
Until next year,
Yes,
but
yes,
this weekend,
but
Penn
also this
State,
week. Yeah,
Oregon, Big Ten championship game in
big preview coming.
Indianapolis this Saturday night. We're going to preview that later on this week. I'm Tom Hannafin from State of State, a Penn State football show on the Believe Podcast Network. He is Rhett Lewis from the Big Ten and NFL Network. We'll see you later on this week for a full Big Ten title game preview.